Alright, here we go again. Welcome back to another episode of Journey Through Cinema. Today we're going to take a look at another film from Cecil B. DeMille, who at this point was cranking out features at an incredible rate of 10 to 13 per year. Today we're going to be looking at a specific film from him, The Cheat, a film notable for a couple of reasons. First, this is an early example of a narrative that centers around characters who are kind of unlikable, the archetype of the anti-hero. Now, it isn't the first to do this. There's been lots of silent cinema that made use of anti-heroes or unlikable protagonists. You could even argue that maybe Charlie Chaplin's most famous character of The Tramp is sort of this almost kind of pseudo-villain, just in the way that he's sort of this public nuisance in most of his appearances. But what made The Cheat really unique is for this time period in 1915, it was really, uncommon to have the entire cast be nothing but unlikable, anti-heroes. All three main characters, played by Fanny Ward, Jack Dean, and Sessue Hayakawa, are all despicable in their own way. To have a film with one scumbag, that's one thing, but to have your film filled with nothing but scumbags, that's entirely another. The Cheat is an early example of how having a compelling story doesn't necessarily mean needing someone to root for. You only need one thing for an effective story: to make the audience want to know what happens next. But the second thing the movie is famous for is probably the more substantial and important part. Hollywood in the 1915s was hardly the most diverse place. Some may argue that it still isn't diverse enough, and still has a way to go to rectify those early mistakes. But jumping back to 1915 again, there is no denying that Hollywood was extremely hostile to people of other races or cultures, with most people of other ethnicities being played by white actors in blackface. And most of these depictions are outright overblown characterizations that in most cases would just be bold-faced racism in the modern times. Few film buffs need a refresher on how movies like Birth of a Nation contributed negatively to race relations within the US. My point is that in 1915 America, Hollywood was a very hard place to break into if you were part of a minority group. This may be why the film's greatest achievement is probably in launching the career of Sessue Hayakawa, the first Asian star of Hollywood. Now, I don't want to pat them on the back too hard, because he was typically stuck being typecast in these roles as a villain that would make use of his good looks to charm women, just how the actor was able to charm real-life women in that era. But baby steps for diversity. Remembering back to my Wild and Woolly review, I kind of perhaps unfairly made fun of Douglas Fairbanks' looks, but for Hayakawa, it's pretty plain to see why he was easy on the eyes, and especially popular with American women. But let's jump into this. What is the story here? The movie kind of plays out like a Wall Street Bets version of 1915. It centers around a group of investors gambling with the stock market and losing out big. As most day traders typically do. Fanny Ward's character of Edith Hardy is a woman who has a healthy appetite. Wealthy, not a healthy appetite. She probably eats well. Wealthy appetite. That her husband is struggling to keep up with. He begs her to hold off spending and wait for his safe investments to come through, but she instead is seduced by the promise of a big trade. She steals from a trust, very classy, in order to bet on a questionably volatile stock, thinking it would go to the moon, I guess, or something. For this taking place in 1915, it's kind of funny how little some things change. After she loses her entire fund on the equivalent of, GameStop or Bitcoin or whatever, she then has to turn to the aid of Hayakawa's seductive Hishuru Tori, who offers to pay out her debts in return for, ownership of her or sleeping with her or something. The movie, being in the modest 1910s, keeps it deliberately vague, but you get the idea. When her husband, Richard Hardy, played by Jack Dean, wins big on his safer investment, she tries to back out of the deal with Hishiro, but is refused. He attempts to rape and brand her as his own personal property, which I know that's pretty intense for stuff of this time period, but lucky for her, and I guess unlucky for him, she comes packing and counters his branding iron with a bullet. So, got him. Then the husband, suspecting her disloyalty, arrives and finds Hishiro bleeding out in his living room. What a crazy scene, I guess. When the police arrive, he tries to take the blame for his wife's crime. So right now, for lead characters, you have a woman who steals from charities in order to gamble for money to buy expensive coats, and you have a man who tries to rape, buy, and brand women. So you may be thinking, what's so wrong with the husband then? Well, besides neglecting all the people in his life out of just pure greed, the husband takes Hishiro to court and tries to get him sent away for shooting himself. Now, this is an outright lie, and Hayakawa's character is kind of a rapist who thinks he can literally own women, so try not to feel too bad for him. But also keep in mind that the husband knows none of this yet. And speaking of not knowing things yet, we're going to get into spoiler time here, so fair warning from here on out. Ready? In the end, he tries to convince a jury that he only shot Hishuru because he was trying to, I guess, kill him, and keep in mind, he has no idea what happened because his wife hasn't been honest with him. Regardless, it doesn't work, and Richard is convicted of the murder, and his wife is then forced to show the brand to the jury. And they dismiss the case, and Hishuru is dragged off to prison instead. After that, I guess it's happily ever after for these two remaining dirtbags. See what I mean? These are all irredeemable characters. But here's the big thing. It works. Watching these jerks kind of pitted against each other is surprisingly fun and compelling. You aren't really worried about them on a personal level because they're all so slimy, but watching their kind of thought process and what they do does make for a gripping story. And it's not perfect by any means. Again, we've discussed this before, but the pacing on many of these 50-minute features feels way too rushed and quick by modern standards. It also falls pretty deep into melodrama. Unfortunately, the greatest weakness is still the end of the movie, which leaves a bad taste in the mouth. At the conclusion, the movie really tries hard to let the wife and husband off easy. It wants Hayakawa's character to be the one true villain of the film. I think that was the legitimate intention, and that's the only clear read I can have on such an ending. This again is the racism of early 1915 seeping in. The movie ends with the two, just awful couple embracing while the Asian man is dragged off, and I'm supposed to feel good that justice was somehow served. Except for one small problem. Those two lovebirds were just as villainous as Hayakawa's character. I don't feel good that they got off so easy. I think they should have gotten just as big of a comeuppance as he did. But alas, the film really thinks justice has been served. And maybe if you left aside that subtext of racism, this ending would work by modern standards. Because having two bad people get a leg up on a third person who's even more bad, it can work in a kind of lesser of two evils approach. But when you factor in the fact the film really thought that it was a legitimately good, feel-good ending, I can't help but feel that the filmmakers may not have been in on the joke. In the end, despite misplaced intentions, I really did enjoy this movie. The story was entertaining, and it was fun to see what lengths the characters would go to pull their fat out of the fire. All the injuries were self-inflicted in a way that makes it a pretty entertaining watch. But I still think the most important thing is the film is worth remembering for pushing that early diversity. Yes, it typecast the diversity into villainous roles, but it was at least a small first step that allowed someone other than another white actor in blackface to take center stage. Although Hayakawa starred in films both before and after this one, it was this one that launched his career into the stratosphere and made him a star well worth following. And that alone for 1915 cinema is worth tipping the hat to. And that's my thoughts on The Cheat. If you've seen it, feel free to tell me what you thought of it down below. Until next time, keep those reels turning. We'll see you then.